Hi, I'm Melissa Cable with Create Recklessly, and I'm here to show you how to set spots in leather and faux leather. Spots, also known as nail heads, come in lots of different sizes and shapes. You can see here we have some rounded head spots. Here's some actually used on a design. They come in a couple sizes. Here's small ones. These are conical shaped spots, which are used across here to give a little more dimension. And then there's also interesting shapes of spots. These are, for example, some rectangular spots which work together to create stitches. The thing with spots are that they're incredibly flexible in their use. You can use them to connect things together, as I did here. So this spot connects these 3 layers of leather together. I can use them here simply as an accent. I just wanted some pops of metal in this design, so they're not holding anything together. They're just for design's sake. Here I use them to connect panels together. And here I actually use them to connect this beautiful piece of beadwork to the leather. And they require less pressure to set them than eyelets and rivets, and that makes them the perfect use for attaching delicate beadwork without risking damaging the beadwork. We'll talk about more how to do that in a moment. But first, let's talk about how we pierce our leather in order to set our spot. In the Create Recklessly toolkit, we do have a 8mm or 5/16 spot setter. So this is really unique to the Create Recklessly line. And it was important for me to include it because I wanted you to be able to, in just one hammer, be able to create the perfect distance for your spot. So with that hole created, we can now slide the spot in there. And you can see that it goes through very cleanly. You'll also notice that the holes are perfectly spaced, so they're not extending on either side of the spot, making it a nice clean presentation around the front. Now on this leather, I've backed it. It's not required to have a backed piece of leather or faux leather when you're setting spots because there's no way they're going to come out or stretch out after the fact. I just happen to really like using contrasting colors. And be sure to watch our video on how to apply backings to leather. And we'll talk about why we do this and when we do it. So to set this spot, now that we have it in the holes onto the leather, we're going to simply turn it over. And in this case, you can use your work surface here. We won't need to use our anvil like we've done in setting eyelets and rivets and snaps, because again, we don't need as much pressure to set these. So a lot of people like to just kind of start them with their fingers and push them on over. I don't recommend you finish it off like that because you want a really good flat and flush setting so that there's no scratching. So for example, let's turn this over here and you can see it's really smooth. I can wear this against my skin. There's going to be nothing that's going to snag on me. In this case here, I have the leather backed, but also again a real smooth setting. Now one question that may come up is why, if we have a backing, do we not try and hide these spots underneath the backing? And it's a personal preference. I like to put my spot settings over the backing because when you go to glue your backing down, you're going to have all these little bumps and it doesn't look intentional anyways. So your hardware might as well be set over it, which has more intention and doesn't cause any conflicts with the wearability of it, again, because it's very smooth when it's set properly. So we've started pushing this one over here, and I like to take one of my little hammers that I have and just tap it down. I'm going to turn this around, and I'm going to tap down this other side. Now you notice I'm really holding the leather down firmly on each side as I tap him down. Just light taps. I don't want to collapse the spot, but I want to make sure that those ends are as far down as I can so nothing's going to be pokey on the very end. So turn that over and you can see we have an unblemished, properly set spot. Now the little spots can be slightly more difficult to set, and I'm going to show you why. You'll notice on the larger one that the length of the prongs are equal to the diameter of the spot itself. So you're able to really close them down on top of each other very neatly. But in this case, you can see the prongs are slightly longer than the diameter of the spot. Now it needs to be in order to be able to go through a couple layers if you wanted to use it as an attachment. But again, because the prongs are longer than the diameter, it can be a little tricky. So there's a few ways to set it, and I'm going to show you my, my preferred way. And let me turn this over here. You'll see here on the back of this one that I set, we cross them over. Now I prefer to cross them over like this rather than opening them up like a brad, because when we open them up like a brad, I'm going to show you what happens. So here's a piece of leather where I've already pierced some holes, which I'll show you how to do in a moment. But I also have a little trick here I want to show you. I have a little black dot drawn between the holes, and that's because sometimes if I pierce my holes, when I'm all done and I go to set in all my spots, I can't find the holes anymore. So if I have a little black dot between them, it helps remind me where they are, and that spot's just going to cover that anyway, so it won't be a problem. So I'm going to push that in here. Now if I was to open this up like a brad, and I'm going to use some pliers to help me do that, sometimes what you do is you get a bit of a ghosting effect on the front. Let me lay this down, see if I can exaggerate a little bit so you can see it there at home. But if they aren't completely flat, you can see little bumps here from the ends of those prongs. And especially going across an entire bracelet, it'll begin to ripple a little bit. So I really prefer not to set them that way and prefer to set them where they're crossed over. One thing also to see is the holes. When we punch the holes, if you can look at the area around this spot right here is nice and clean. There's no holes showing from the side. But this one, because the holes were punched too far apart, you can see a little bit of the holes, and it makes it a lot less cleaner. So let's talk about how to pierce these slots for the spot and make sure that we do it in a way that's going to give us the cleanest space around that spot. For that, we're going to use the 1.5 millimeter slot piercer. And you'll see it's about the same width as our prongs are on our spots. We're going to use it on our interchangeable head. So we're going to take off the spot piercer. Now you'll notice the distance on our spot piercer is just too large to use for our small spots. And that's why we're going to do these manually. We're going to screw on our 1.5 millimeter, and then we're going to take our tiny spot and we're just going to press to create an impression so we know exactly where we need those to be. And then I go to the inside of those impressions because we also have to take into account the thickness of the tool. Now again, if I wait too long when I take this out, that faux leather is going to slightly self-heal, which makes it really hard to see those holes, especially with eyes like mine. So I'm going to go ahead and put that little dot there. Now I'm going to take this spot, place it in the holes, covering that dot. And again, you'll see I have a nice clean area around there. I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to cross them. Now, rather than use my hammer, because this is such a tiny area, I like to use my pliers. And again, give it a firm grip so the spot doesn't move around on you, and fold it down slightly angled, just part way. Then you're going to take the next one and fold it slightly down, just part way. And then finish it off with a slight hammer in order to make sure it's nice and flat and flush. Now nothing's going to snag on that. And so you can see you have a much smaller profile here versus opening it like a brad. And when we flip it over, you can see this one here is much flatter around it than this one, which kind of has some bubbling here. And that's from those prongs pushing that faux leather up. So I do prefer to set them crossed over versus opening them up like a brad whenever you can. Now I did talk about how I prefer to use these spots over the backing when I set spots. But in the case of the small ones, because they're so tiny, oftentimes I will set my backing over small ones if I'm only using small ones, and you can barely see them through the backing. So play around with it both ways, and you'll kind of come up with your preferred method for working with hardware and backing, and in which order you like to do things. And you'll find that out over time. So thank you for watching our video on how to set spots. I hope you have a chance to also check out our videos on how to set eyelets and how to set rivets and how to set snaps. There's a whole bunch of different hardware pieces you can use to connect things together or to just add great pops of metal color to your designs. Thanks again for watching.